back. We've got a couple of council members just making their way in after that break. Thanks very much, everybody, for the indulgence. In discussion with the city manager, I think administration had a bit of an overview before we move into discussion and motions, council. Director Manuel, based on the things you heard, I think potentially have, again, that sort of overview and maybe some recommendations. I saw you engaged in some discussion with folks that are here.
Yes, absolutely. So I wanted to take an opportunity just because we didn't do it at the onset. So the affordable housing strategy that's in front of us actually is intended to replace what's an existing document right now, which is a high-level guidance document, which is our affordable housing master plan that came into effect, I believe, around 2011. So in order to prepare, and we heard some information from some of the delegations here today that asked about kind of specific demographics and whatnot within the affordable housing strategy. And a lot of that information would be found within our community housing needs assessment, which was completed prior to this roll-up document being the affordable housing strategy. So that's an 84-page document that really supplements this piece. One of the things that we've heard here today was that the strategy contains 3 goals. It has 23 strategies from those goals and recommends 42 actions as to how we can address the need for what the definition defines as affordable housing within this document, understanding that across the community there might be some different interpretations of that. But in large part, from what I heard today, was overall support of the strategy. In fact, when I tracked it, I only saw of the 42 recommended actions that only 2 of these actions were contentious, and those were, frankly, it was 1.1.2a, which was the city establish a nonprofit housing corp, and there was 2.4.3.a, which was create a housing corp to lead housing projects. The overall analysis of the strategy that says we want to strive to achieve more affordable housing in the community was overwhelmingly supported, as was the majority of the content within the strategy that we have right now. So there's a couple of things I think that are important to mention. So the city's direct dollar investment today in affordable housing is fairly limited. It's in the neighborhood of hundreds of thousands of dollars typically, because we are generally doing pass-through funding through various federal and provincial programs. Now, that pass-through funding is sometimes provided in operating and sometimes provided specifically to rent supplements, and other times it's for capital construction. Now, in each case, depending on the specific provincial or federal project, there is a number of conditions that come with it, and those conditions can specify the specific demographics we're trying to address. It will specify whether that can be used for operating, whether it can be used for capital, whether there's legacy commitments that if we go into a partnership that there's certain criteria as to it has to be a certain use for a certain period of time. There's no big pot of money that we have unrestricted, unfettered access to that we can allocate as we please. And one of the complexities that comes that certainly I'm learning as part of this portfolio is it's not as simple as just building a building, and it's not as simple as operating a building. You really have to consider who's going to be living in the units. In some instances, as we've heard, rent supplement's an excellent solution to get people out of the core housing tile up to an affordable level that works with their income levels. But for other people, there's supports that are required to enable them outside of the financial contributions to be successful in those units. And for some people, we heard just recently that the needs are so complex that even if a facility exists, the facility without supports is not going to work. So I believe that the affordable housing strategy, as it's presented here, does really actually recognize at a high level that no one approach is going to work. That frankly, we are going to have to look at every option and every partnership we can. But the one thing that is clear is, to date, the city does not have a dedicated resource or resources that are guiding this process. There is nobody that is, I can tell you in my portfolio, I hear, and through council, we see several requests that come up from our community-based agencies that are looking to bring housing to the community, whether that's Sunrise House, whether that's CMHA, or a variety of other organizations. But they all have basically the same things. They're doing them off the side of their desk. They're looking for support. They're looking for municipal contribution, and we want to be in a position to do that. We believe that the strategy identifies the city's role in doing that and providing some support there. And as administration, we are pleased to be pursuing this opportunity to be in a role to do that. Now, where we maybe diverge on the strategy a little bit is really, of those 42 actions, it's those two that I identified around the Housing Corp. And I believe if we suggest an amendment to those particular actions, which was 1.1.2a and 2.4.3a, to essentially add the wording, instead of establish a nonprofit housing corp, it could be establish a nonprofit housing corp or alternative. And same with create a housing corp to lead housing projects. It could be create a housing corp or alternative to lead housing projects. And then allow administration to come back to council, having met with industry and the various stakeholders, to define what that alternative would be. We've heard today that the alternative could very well be an internal city resource as opposed to a housing corp. There's also alternatives that I'm probably not even thinking off the top of my head. But I think the intent of the strategy is non-contentious. The vast majority, 40 of the 42 actions recommended in it, and if we had any high-level plan in the city in which we actioned every single action, I'd be fairly astonished. But I think by making it clear that it doesn't have to be a housing corp, it can be an alternative, and then later coming back to define what that alternative is. There's no action here today to fund a housing corp. That's been removed. That was killed at the last council meeting. I think this puts us in a position to move forward and come out with something that everybody can agree with.
Thanks for that, Dr. Manuel. So council will have opportunity for discussion on not just the information Director Manuel shared or the perspective, but also that we heard from the delegations that were here today and sort of our knowledge. So I see Councillor Platt and then Councillor Bressie. Councillor Platt.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I appreciate that synopsis there, Director Manuel. I think you're probably accurate on those 2 points. I guess the thing that's hitting me is, we heard from pretty much every single delegate that got up today was collaboration. And so out of these 42 objectives, I think one of the biggest hurdles I feel we've had so far is that there hasn't been enough collaboration. So I'm just wondering what administration feels would be the best way to have that happen, because I know I'm still not in a position to want to support the strategy without knowing that's happening. So I'm just kind of curious if administration can give me some ideas or some options of how they see that working and who they see being at the table.
Dr. Manuel?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that we heard today is that depending on which specific demographic and which need we're trying to meet within the strategy. So to hit our 37% goal, it was identified that there's certain segments of that. So whether that's seniors, accessible, perhaps it's on the supportive housing piece. Every single demographic that we're trying to meet there is going to require a different approach with different collaboration. So I really do believe that the actions identified in here speak to the need for us to work collaboratively, to have tax incentives, I don't think any one cookie cutter approach is going to work to achieve all the results. I think it's really going to be about not what the strategy says, but how we apply it in practice. And I think that's where a lot of work has to come into maybe creating a framework around that when we discuss what the alternative looks like to a housing corp, because we know that nothing's going to advance in this strategy in a real efficient manner until we determine collectively what that looks like.
Okay, Councillor Bressie.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Given. Just another question for administration. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate what was just shared. But another concern I heard today that was really important for me personally, was concerns around there might be some specialized needs for youth that are looking for this. And in terms of maybe that's something we should be having a strategy considered. I'm certainly not going to suggest any amendments on the fly today to do that, because I want that to be well considered if council does decide that that's something we want to pay attention to. I'm just curious if council does decide to ask administration to do some extra work in terms of how do we consider youth. Specifically, if we asked administration about the need for youth in this community, were they considered in the housing needs inventory? And if you guys were looking for if we asked for more information about how many youth under 18 are needed in the community, would we be asking you guys to go out and do new inventory, new work, or is that something that you guys have already inventoried and we could ask for reports on, and there's information you already have in your pocket?
I have a feeling that might be Mr. DeRoche, and that might be in that 84-page document that's sort of a precursor to what we've seen here today. Mr. DeRoche?
Thank you, through the mayor. There are several points to that question. So the data for youth is captured somewhat in the needs assessment. Youth are the largest population in poverty in the city, so most of the people in the statistics for poverty are children. So the data for youth between 16 and 24 in need of housing support is very challenging because they typically fall in what's known as provisionally housed. And that's people who are either couch surfing, staying with friends, living in cars, who aren't captured in most of the data. Now, youth were addressed in the engagement for this, so they are identified in a needs in that assessment, and they were contemplated in this strategy. Now, they weren't brought out separately in any specific point in the strategy, but if you look throughout the strategy, it talks about continuously collaborating with other organizations, including GP Youth Emergency Shelter, to develop these projects. So if you look in the actual monitoring plan, we call for networking events, at least 2 events annually, where we bring all these organizations together. It calls for establishing data sharing systems so that all the organizations are sharing their numbers so that we understand the problems. It talks about working with specific organizations for whatever project we're going to build. We're not going to say, hey, we're going to build a building with no clients in mind. We're going to approach these organizations and say, what do you need? How can we help you build it? So this strategy contemplates the whole range of needs, and that's not just youth. That's off-reserve Indigenous housing, that's seniors housing, that's complex needs. All of those issues are intended to be addressed through collaboration in this process, and they're identified in specific actions with specific indicators in the monitoring plan.
Mr. Roche, just similarly, in terms of the affordable housing inventory, it looks like the largest sort of segment of the inventory is in bachelor or studio style units, and that we're actually sort of above the targets. I guess that might not be exactly accurate, but it says one of the tables shows that there's 364 bachelor studio units. So when it comes to defining targets, it sort of suggests that we are relatively well served there, and the plan doesn't necessarily set a target for establishing more bachelor single units. Am I interpreting that right? And I'm just curious, I can't imagine that youth are looking for 3-bedroom apartments as a young person. So can you talk about the report doesn't necessarily talk about age, but it talks about sort of form, I guess. And can you talk about that relationship? Am I seeing something that's not there, that a connection between the form of housing and the age?
Sure. So that is a definite challenge in addressing the needs of the specific groups and the form of the housing. So the actual numbers and targets focus on the physical form of the housing. And while the amount of bachelor suites available is sufficient to meet our targets up until 2030, there's still a huge need for those types of units. In terms of youth housing, the challenge is they don't have references. It's more difficult for them to actually get into housing. And so we need dedicated units that are coordinated with an organization like GPS in order to ensure that they're able to get into units, because the biggest barrier is just not being able to get on a lease.
Okay. Councilor Minhas.
I think Chris was going to say something. Thank you, Mayor Given. Chris, thank you very much. You updated, and also I heard a lot industrial. They brought a lot of good points. When you said there's a restricted grants, not restricted, the grants are specific, you can use in some buying the land or building the part, whatever the reasons are. Are related to the mentally health peoples or the people are in the drug? They cleared up and they affordable house to provide them, and also like single mother have kid and stuff. But I know they don't call the subsidy now, but those grants come separately, or they come generally tell the city what to do with it or not to do it.
So I can certainly. So 2 points. I guess just ahead of that, I just wanted to highlight that the affordable housing strategy, it indicates in here that it's complementary to our 5-year plan to end homelessness. So it doesn't necessarily, when we talk about the bachelor suites and the one bedroom apartments and stuff, there actually may be a greater need for that in the plan to end homelessness because of the supports and those things. So I just wanted to put that caveat out there that I think that was intended more around the family component. But to answer Councillor Minhas's question, frankly, there is and that's one of the challenging things with this portfolio and housing as a whole, is there's so many pots of money coming from so many different avenues that some is dedicated to mental health, some is dedicated to homelessness, recovery, and others is just income supports. And every single program has different parameters as to what those funds can and cannot be used for, and at which point they expire and a person graduates to not being supported. So having a resource that can help our community make sure that we're taking full benefit of what's available to our residents would be useful.
Councillor Platt?
Thanks, McGibbon. Just on the, there was lots of talk today, and I think it was well received with industry saying they were fine with looking at a grant coordinator sort of position or style format. I'm just wondering, when I've read through this, and I've read through it several times, the one thing that I keep coming back to is I don't see a grant coordinating position be a full-time role for just housing. I love the idea if it's a grant coordinator position for the entire city, so we're looking at other buckets of funding and other opportunities for the city. So I just wonder if administration's looked at it of us having a grant coordinating position for the entire organization versus just only specifically on housing.
Mr. Manuel?
So certainly we have, and that actually falls into my recommendation that, following here today, that we have some direction to identify what an alternative does look like, because that's where we'd come back and say, we can do this, this, and this if we have this resource, for instance, right? And I think that's where we'd analyze that for you.
I think also, Councillor Platt, the where was it? The 1.111111A, create a permanent affordable housing coordinator position. I think the intent behind that is the grant application portion, but also the system coordination of external partners and ensuring that there's data sharing and monitoring of the plan and targets. So it's sort of I think the chasing grants is a portion of that role. But the other part is, when we say collaborate, it is coordinating that collaboration and coordinating with the other external partners. So I think that there's the position that's in there is not exclusively just go and get grants, because I think you're right. I think that those come and go. Staying on top of it would be a significant amount of work. But the other part is coordinating the system of all these independent partners and parties that are doing work in the area.
Yeah. So just a question on that, if I can then. If that's been deemed a priority and it's been such a big gap, I guess I'm just kind of confused or concerned that it's just being talked about now. Like, if this has been being done off the side of desks for so long, and we've been able to fill this space for the amount of time we've been able to fill in it, it just seems a little scary to me that all of a sudden this needs to be that. And I would look at an organization structure and hope that if that was truly their priority, you would look at something else that you would do within the organization to fill that capacity. And it just feels like the housing corp was the only way to do it. And I'm just curious of why we couldn't have been able to fulfill that within our community social development now, or in some capacity that way.
So to be really clear, Councillor Platt, so the 1.1 under strategy 1.11, and then the first one there is create a permanent affordable housing coordinator position. And that's different and distinct from develop an entity.
And I can
they're
appreciate
two
that.
They're two different things.
But we would never normally, as council, as somebody that always says, get out of the weeds, and we're normally not talking about departments about one single person. And it feels like to me, if CSD really needed this person to do this, then I would have hoped that through directors and through budget process we would have resolved it that way. And it feels like to me, anyways, and maybe I'm the only one on council feels this. The housing corp was the only way we could create this position and do that. And I'm just wondering if it's that important for the organization to have that through CLT and through city manager, why this hasn't been just something that would be brought to as a budgetary item for just that one position for this one person.
Sure, Director Manuel.
Yeah, certainly. So to respond to that, and bear with me because I came into this portfolio fairly recently, but it's my understanding that so we have had people on a part-time basis through provincial pass-through dollars that have done components of the affordable housing kind of coordination. That being said, it's not until this council identified affordable housing as one of your key kind of strategic priorities that more attention was placed on this portfolio. And as such, Reid was seconded over from his regular role in planning to, before we jump through a whole bunch of resources on something, we needed to understand what the needs assessment and whatnot was, which is what Reid undertook, was the needs assessment and ultimately revising the strategy that's here today. As the mayor had indicated, separate and distinct from the housing corporation was the need for that affordable housing coordinator position that would have been in addition to that proposed housing corp. The reason a proposed housing corp was looked at as opposed to alternatives to a housing corp was, frankly, that's the direction we believed we received at the time. But we do agree that there certainly is alternatives to a housing corp.
Councillor Clayton.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Yeah, sort of down that same path. The Housing Corp title is pretty vague, in my opinion, based on hearing, especially input today from probably at least half of the delegates were addressing social and supportive housing needs. And so my question is after this Housing Corp position is established, because I agree with some of the comments that were brought through the delegations in regards to, the number one goal being to establish the corporation, in my opinion, could have been after some collaboration and more finite sort of execution of the plan. And putting this bulk of money into administration was definitely, in my opinion, a red flag. So with this Housing Corp position, being an umbrella organization, what are the opportunities for this to sort of fold into support for social and support for housing needs in the supportive and social housing category?
So just to be clear, the administration's not saying that only a housing corp can do that. Everything you just mentioned could be done through an alternative way, whether that's being part of a housing department within the city or a resource within a department potentially. So, but absolutely the intent in either scenario is to support the community, the broader community, and the agencies that are also trying to fill some of these gaps that exist. Does that answer that?
I don't see anybody else in the queue right now. We should get on to sort of, after this discussion this morning, what arises and what action will we take. If council took no action at this stage, then the affordable housing master plan would be the document that continues to exist on the city's website and would guide administration's work in this area. Or council could choose to take this plan that is more current, built on that sort of 84-page assessment of the current situation in the community, and propose revisions to it, amendments. But if we take no action, then the plan that we have is the one that administration would continue to work on. I see Councillor Plotz in the queue. I will say that my view of the sort of overall system, looking at it as at a systems level, is that we have a great sector of private industry that is involved in construction and in some in owning properties that are for rent. We see some portion of that private sector interested and involved already in meeting some of this demand. And it's these can be complex clients that come with complex needs that may require specific solutions. We have great community agencies and partners who are interested in building projects when they have the resources to be able to do that. But their core function is usually operating the projects, these sort of housing programs. We have external funders that from time to time pop up with money. The missing thing that I see is somebody that has a consistent role in establishing physical units. And there needs to be some entity that does that. And I had always imagined that there would be some collaboration with all these other entities. The city isn't going to build a construction company and hire our own carpenters. Any project would be built with the private sector, obviously. And I don't imagine the city becoming an operator. We have a perfectly great housing management body in Grand Spirit, who are working with us to enter into managing physical properties where there are clients that have very complex needs in terms of permanent supportive housing. That's relatively new, but they have great experience in that. I don't think we need to duplicate that. But I think that my view of the system is that there is a gap and a tool in the toolbox. And if there are alternate ways of establishing that, I think that we're called on to look at that in collaboration with the community and say, okay, so what are the pluses and minuses of different ways of filling that gap? And I think we need to give administration the latitude to have that discussion. I was a bit disappointed that there weren't very specific recommendations that came forward and said, here's what you should do today. I think what I'm hearing from administration is with those simple amendments, that would give them the latitude to have that discussion offline with participants in the sector to bring forward some more specific recommendations while still allowing the plan to go forward to council to be adopted. So it's sort of a dual channel thing. Let's not hold up the other 40 recommendations that everybody, I think, agrees that they're completely in support of. And let's amend the plan so that there's a space to have that discussion about how we can fill this gap of who's building new units on a consistent basis that appreciates the complex needs of some of the clients that might be in there. Councillor Platt, you're in the queue.
Thanks, Mayor Gibbon. So I guess what I'm still struggling with all this, though, is that even with the 42 objectives, I think the concern that we heard today was there wasn't enough collaboration. So if we approve this in theory today, we haven't collaborated anymore. We've just approved it. And I think there's a real fear with industry that without collaboration, that some of these things could just start happening on their own. And that's my fear with this as well. And I don't want to see us slow this down. I think there's good objectives, but I think, the one of the gentleman's point, if we rush this through without collaboration, it's probably not going to work in the end anyways. And that's my fear with this all is what's our risk if we take a month right now, we do proper collaboration with the industry and stakeholders to make sure that these are the right objectives. And then we start picking through the objectives. I want to know how that conversation is going to happen. And I appreciate that, Mr. Manuel said, that could happen and we could look down that path, but I want to ensure that we're going to have stakeholders, chamber, people that sat here and spoke today, the Grand Spirit that didn't speak today, but those user groups sitting around one forum to make sure this was done. I appreciate the city did a document and went out and started talking and said, hey, it's a starting point. I think the consensus I've heard back outside of the room today and in the room today was there wasn't enough collaboration on this. And so I'm just really concerned with moving forward with this. Yeah, I appreciate it to just be something that could sit on a shelf, but I don't want it to be something that sits on a shelf. I want it to be useful, but I don't feel that without good collaboration, it's going to be useful. So I don't know how we address that. So I'll look to my council colleagues and hopefully you have an answer. I've got a motion I'd like to entertain, but I'm not sure if anybody else has the same feeling around this right now.
So Councillor Platt, one thing that I'd say, if you look in the implementation plan, it starts on page 21 of the document. There's nothing that says on any of the items that they would happen by a specific date. They generally identify within the course of a year. So I would imagine that over the course of 2020, we'd be able to have some space for collaboration. And I think the other big thing that I would say, and you see that in things like developing financial incentives, that would by definition require, and I think it actually says, work with community organizations or industry to develop financial incentives. I think that's so collaboration is an ongoing process. I'm not sure that any part of the plan says that we do one bit of collaboration and then everything's good. I think the plan is specific that it says there's a whole bunch of collaboration that's going to be required, between now and 2030 on an ongoing basis. and with different partners and different groups as needed. So, the idea that we need to stop and collaborate before we can move forward, I think the plan says we need to collaborate as we move forward. I guess additionally, I would just say the suggestion that we haven't engaged. I heard UDI say that they were at every meeting with city staff on this. And so the idea that there hasn't been any dialogue or collaboration, I don't know if administration can give us a sense of how many meetings or sessions or engagements or submissions there were from the community and partners. How would we measure collaboration that led to this document? Dr. Manuel?
So certainly we could provide a summary of the number of meetings and stuff that occurred, but just to strengthen that collaboration piece, like when we get into the actual actions found within the strategy, we identify waiver of fees, tax exemptions, financial incentives. I don't think the intent of a high-level document like this is to get into the specific that on such and such project, the city will entertain this sort of tax exemption. I think it's a broader, we have to commit to that ongoing discussion as to how we can be competitive and make these projects enticing for industry to partner and participate with us. And if there's one thing that I from administration can take forward from this process to date, is that council has a very, very strong desire for us to be as collaborative and consultative as we can on every aspect of this strategy, and I think it's incumbent upon me and my role to ensure that we're doing that.
Councillor Clayton?
Thanks, Mayor Gibbon. I appreciate your comment in regards to the collaboration going forward into 2023. I guess my concern is when you have industry and stakeholders at the table who are using their own time, which obviously is very valuable, to offer collaboration prior to us hiring staff and getting down a path that costs money. It's a concern to me. Collaboration should be continual, but the framework needs to be prior to we spend any money, in my opinion. So the collaboration, although it's been along the process, just because you come and sit around a table and your opinions are heard, it doesn't mean that they're necessarily implemented into a plan. And so at this point, I know that there's some councillors around the table that are interested in what this looks like for supportive and social housing. And some people are truly in support of the affordable housing plan, how it sets forward with the parameters right now. But I still don't know if industry, stakeholders, and councils are still have the same goal in mind. So that's my concern.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Clayton. Councillor Platt.
Just another question, I guess, for me, for administration, and something that I've struggled with this whole thing, and appreciating that we're potentially looking at trying to improve a strategy is, we've never identified a funding source, and for me, that's something that is a concern. I don't know what we're looking at funding. I don't know how much funding. I don't know where the funding would go. I have an appetite to want to fund people that want to get out of Serenity House. I have an appetite to want to fund youth. I have an appetite to want to fund things. I don't personally have a lot of appetite to continually fund homelessness because I feel like it's addressed through another strategy. That's my feeling on it. As a council, we haven't had a conversation about where we see this money going if we do allocate money. And so the whole strategy is nice, and a lot of these objectives are internal. We can do these with industry, and we can just pick away at these. They don't need to be cost. But at some point, if we're going to put together a whole strategy, I think council has to come to a conversation about what's the money we're putting into it. And that was my I guess, frustration with us before, was when we said let's start a housing corp, I wasn't expecting it to come back with a $600,000 sticker, and we still didn't put a person in a home yet. So that's why I said no to it. I'd like to say yes, this moving forward, but I'd like to know how much money we're putting and how we all feel like how that money's going to be allocated to it. And so that is part of the strategy. At some point, we have to have that conversation. And so until we have that, I'm still a little bit concerned about putting forward a strategy that we don't have any funding for anyways.
Councillor Friesen.
Thank you, Mayor Gibbon. What I'm having a difficult time with is that we have here an affordable housing strategy that everyone who came before us today read. And some spoke to affordable housing as the, just having a tough time making ends meet, but really having no other social needs. But the majority of who we heard from was really more concerned with the supportive and social housing needs. And that is not delineated in this strategy or clearly addressed as a more complex matter. And that concerns me a great deal, because when we approve this and then the majority of our residents think that now we've cleared out, or our goal here is to clean out the folks that we had residing in the compound with the tents this summer, that they get housed, and that's not necessarily who this strategy as it's written is targeting. And it's really not clear to me how that all folds into one strategy, as Councillor Palat said. And unless and until that's clarified a bit, either within this strategy or broken out of this one and put into its own, I'm not sure that I'm quite in favor of this as it's written here. Those are my concerns. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Friesen. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Well, I've got some specific ideas for the strategy that I'll be addressing later when we get to making motions. I think that I've got the same concerns that I'm hearing my council colleagues say, and at the same time, I don't think that stops me from supporting this plan at a high level. And two specific concerns is, one, I really agree that this plan doesn't address supportive housing, which is arguably a bigger need in our community, and that's something that I do think we do need to put folks' time, attention, resources to. At the same time, it is a very different need than affordable housing. It's very different saying somebody with complex needs, how are we going to help them, than saying working mom who's very functional, just doesn't quite have enough income to support her kids, how do we support her? And I'm really comfortable having a strategy that doesn't address that supportive need, as long as we're being clear that that's still a big need in our community, and that's maybe a separate strategy we need to develop. I think actually maybe we should have separate strategies for those, because the needs are so different. So I really agree we've got a need to address social or supportive housing. I really agree the strategy doesn't do that. I think the strategy largely does what it's trying to do, though, which is support affordable housing in our community. I think the other thing I'd point out to council is that the things the strategy contemplates, most of them, and the ones that are potentially the most contentious, the most expensive, and the ones that have the biggest impact on our community, administration doesn't have the authority to actually implement any of these without it coming back to councils. For example, talking about land use bylaw changes, that needs to be an act of council. Talking about potential development incentives, that needs to be an act of council. Talking about the budget put to this, ultimately council endorses budgets. So I think that I've got concerns about looking at all these action items. I could see a really great way that action item goes, and I can also see a path where it wouldn't be nice, this action item, depending on how you do it. This high-level strategy that, yeah, it could go multiple ways. But the MGA doesn't give administration a lot of leash to go out and implement this strategy without further council feedback. The things that this strategy is asking to be done is specifically in the MGA. A lot of it is authorities that council doesn't even have the ability to delegate, even if we wanted to. I just encourage council to keep that in mind as we're discussing this.
Thanks, Councillor Bressie. I was going to say something similar, that the role of any council policy document or strategy is to guide administration's work over the course of a number of years. And if we're and those plans don't fetter council's decision making on any of the individual actions that would come forward. So to spend any money endorsing a plan, supporting a plan, does not actually approve any budget funds or establish new positions in the organization. It guides administration's work so they can figure out which things they should be proposing to council at budget time, and then council would decide whether or not they want to support them as they come forward. But the city has a number of different plans and strategies, but these are big picture multi-year documents that have tons of individual actions that end up forming basically the business of the city. And council gets to vote on each of those things as they come up and are brought forward. So I think it's important to remember that context and what the role of the strategy is in terms of guiding administration's work, not making decisions that only council can make, as Councillor Bressie highlighted. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given, and thank you for this robust round of dialogue to my council peers. I'd like to echo the sentiments of Councillor Bressie and Mayor Given, but unlike Councillor Bressie and other colleagues, I don't have a lot of issues with what is presented in the plan as far as addressing supportive housing and in that context. I know we're talking about affordable housing, and that's been sort of the big well, okay, what is affordable housing? How do we address this? But there's several examples in there where they address it throughout the plan. And again, this is a high-level document that's guiding administration's decision-making process, and it's still going to come back to council in the future, anything that gets acted on. But talking about strategy 1.2.1, ongoing monitoring, you can go right through that entire list, even right down to 1.2.2, collaborate with community organizations to better understand the needs of their service populations. And then you get into actions to meet regularly with them and identify opportunities for collaborations and understand the needs of the populations they serve. That to me sounds very much like social housing. The other part is in item 2.3. Where we're talking about create housing that meets the needs of the community. It's not just a whitewash statement. There's several statements in there that talks about understanding the needs of the service populations that are in requirement of housing. The community housing needs assessment highlighted that many households struggling with shelter costs face a range of challenges beyond income. This includes factors such as mental health, physical disabilities, and aging. As such, it is important that new affordable housing is developed with consideration for the range of needs in the community. This, to me, is a high-level statement that says we are going to address social housing issues. Personally, I don't take any offense to any of the context that this is written at the high-level that we are talking about it as. What I see is a strategy where we have multiple options, 42 in fact, and then we have a disagreement on 2, and we're arguing about semantics when the truth and reality is it takes years to build bricks and mortars and to build those collaboration partnerships that are going to actually house people and keep them safe in whatever shelter they require. So with that, I'm urging council when we get to motions, let's just really take a hard look at the plan and really take a look at the words that are presented in the plan. It's not meant to be a super detailed. It's meant to give us several different options to look at, and we can say, yeah, we can approve this, move forward, and then work through the issues as they crop up, whether that's we need more collaboration, whether or not we agree on a municipal housing corp, whether that's we're just going to get higher grant writer. I think this is an important document that if we don't update it, we're just going to sit on the old one, as the mayor said, and the old one says pretty close to exactly a lot of these same things, like establish a municipal housing corporation. That was done in 2011. We're in 2020 almost. That's 10 years, and we haven't established a municipal housing corporation yet, but that was in our old plan. So I would encourage council to maybe rethink, I guess, your opposition to approving this, and then we can have that discussion as we move through the affordable housing strategy.
Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. So I don't see anybody in the queue. Council, we should move on to some sort of resolution of our committee of the whole day today. That may be in the form of motions, but administration will need some action. This document had gone up to council. Council referred it back here. And so we do need to move forward in some way. Are there any motions arising? Now would be the point to bring those forward. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I guess I kind of closed on a motion I hadn't even made yet, but I would move that council approve the affordable housing strategy with the amendments to change or alternative in conjunction with talking about the municipal housing corporation. And in 2 instances, I guess just to go on from there, I've already done the motion, but as 1.1.2.a, add in or alternative, and 2.4.3 or alternative, and that's in regards to the housing corporation.
Okay. So Councillor Thiessen's motion was basically a follow-up on the recommendation from administration to provide that for a range that space to discuss and explore alternatives with partners by amending those 2 particular points to add that the city, to make it clear that the city is open to alternatives to that and to discuss with partners. So we do have a motion on the floor. We can discuss and debate Councillor Thiessen's motion. Councillor Plott.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I guess you beat me to the punch. I was going to make a motion. It would be a little bit different this one, so I won't be able to support your motion. And I wouldn't support any motion that leaves the wording that says, and I will be looking to make an amendment here. I just want to hear what my colleagues have to say first, but If there's any wording about us creating or establishing a housing corp, I wouldn't support this document. If those words were taken out of the docket explicitly and we went down a path where the goal was about housing and there was nothing to do with a corporation here, I could consider that. I think that this whole housing corp to me is muddying down this process. And I think if we just remove that, we would be fine. But I don't think, from what I've heard from industry and stakeholders today, my gut feeling on this is leaving those wording in there, as small as it is, and it's just a document that goes on a shelf. We're now basically telling administration that that's something we want to do, and I have zero appetite of creating a housing corp at this point until we have way more collaboration. I can get behind everything else in this document except the housing corp. So I'll let council have a chat about it, and then I'll be making a subsequent motion or amendment.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Platt. Councillor Bressie.
Great, thank you, Mayor Given. Just before I share my thoughts, just two questions about process. One is, my understanding is that if a motion like this passes, it would go to council ultimately for approval. So we wouldn't actually be approving anything today, correct?
So today is, I guess, the recommend up to council with those two amendments. Because ultimately from today, this would arrive at a council meeting as it did go through a committee process. It's just here we're in committee of the whole rather than one of our standing committees.
Great. And then my question for the chair is, I support the large thrust of this motion in terms of I hope that we recommend an amended plan to council to approve. But I've got two specific amendments that I'm hoping to move this afternoon that aren't covered by that motion. So the preference of the chair be for me to make a motion to amend the motion that's on the table, or to vote against it, and if it's defeated, make alternative motions.
Sure. The way I think to manage that would probably be to do two different things, and I'll look to Councillor Thiessen. Maybe I should have made that call to start, to say let's do any motions to amend the plan first, and then ultimately then look forward to recommending it forward to council. That way, if there are other sections that needed to be amended, then we could do that. So, Councillor Thiessen, are you comfortable with that? That your motion would be that committee of the whole approve those two amendments, and then we would follow up with recommend forward to council. Yeah. Okay. So council, to be clear on that, so what we'd be voting on then is those two proposed amendments to those points to add or alternatives, to provide a wider range of alternatives to administration to be able to go and have that dialogue. So we'll have that discussion then. If there are other things that people want to bring forward, then we can do it at that time after we finish this discussion. Okay. So discussion debate on the two specific amendments that Councillor Thiessen is proposing. I guess I would just say that I heard industry very, very specifically say that a housing corp may be the right approach, and that they had an openness to the fact that that could be it. I didn't hear them say exclusively that they could not in any way potentially support any words that had anything to do with housing corporation. I heard them say that they're interested in exploring what types of alternatives there are out there. And I think that that's a pretty reasoned perspective that says that there's an openness to have a dialogue. I would suggest that that's probably the appropriate perspective, because I know that I don't have all of the benefit of industry's knowledge and expertise, and I know that industry doesn't have all of the knowledge and expertise of city administration or the different housing agencies and providers that work in this area. I think giving administration some latitude to try to bring those perspectives together, to do a helpful examination of what the right alternatives are, is probably the right way to go, rather than drawing a line in the sand and saying, no, there's something that's absolutely off limits and we're not even willing to consider it. That's not what I heard from industry. I heard industry have a much more open perspective, particularly from UDI and CHBA, and I'm willing to take them at their word and have that discussion. And if it turns out that there are better ways to resolve the things that are here, then that's great. And if it turns out that on examination, one method, housing corporation is one of those useful ways, then that's great too. But I think we need to be open to having that discussion. So I'd encourage council to support Councillor Thiessen's motion. Any other discussion or debate? Councillor Bressie.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I'm honestly really struggling with this in terms of, I think there could be merit to having a housing corporation, but I don't really. I've got ideas of my very layman reading of the MGA of some financial abilities it it might have that we don't have as a municipality, and I'm aware of some models that don't have large administrative structures that are honestly more just pass-through corporations that some entities have, and they've seen benefit from that. I see benefit having a board of directors with this. I see potential benefit of a housing development corporation. I also see potentials of it being formed in a way that that doesn't bring a lot of those benefits that I see as potential of it. And I think what's tough about having this, even at just exploring this or alternatives, we're giving direction to form housing development corporation or alternatives, but I don't think we've actually given any direction about what we're trying to get out of that, or what we're trying to get out of potential alternatives. And I know for me, I'd be way more comfortable if the strategy said something like explore the merits of having a development corporation, or I think it's worth talking about. Are there merits for having a development corporation? What advantages would it give us? I definitely want to have that conversation because it might be an important tool in our toolbox. It's also one that I don't understand all the benefits could bring, and I definitely don't think we've got alignment on what we want out of a housing development corporation. So while I think that in the strategy we should have talking about it, I don't think we should be giving direction to go form one or something like that. So I'm in an awkward position where I'll be voting in favor of this amendment because I think it's better than what the plan reads if we don't pass an amendment. At the same time, I hope we make a different amendment, or I hope we change this in a different way in terms of I still don't think we're there with this amendment. So it's better than leaving the plan as is, which makes me support if we end up voting on this amendment, but I still don't think that I love this being in the plan how it would read under the amendment.
Thanks, Councillor Bressie. I just reflect that, as you said yourself, pretty much every action in the plan would count on council ultimately endorsing or approving something. And so in spite of the fact that it might be direct administration to go and do something, the completion of that something rests on council being satisfied with the implementation that administration proposes. So I'm not sure that that's a point to get hung up on, because you couldn't incorporate anything without city council actually approving something. I think what I heard you say is the how matters, how we deal with these things. And I think the how is something that we would want to develop in collaboration with others. Councillor Minhas.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I think I'll support this motion from the Chris. The reason are, the way I see it, we have to apply for the grants, and then if we don't build the corporation, and sure that will be do. If we don't approve it, we're going to be getting behind from a lot other cities that are far ahead of us to getting the grants from the provincial and federal government. So that will be somebody is responsible to apply for those grants, and then they can work with the all the industrial people, the private and everything, how we're going to work without. To me, it's benefit this to we move ahead and carry on and work with the industrial as we go. So I will support this motion.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Minhas. Councillor Friesen.
Thank you. I don't really see a way in which I would support the creation and operation of a housing corporation by the city in the way that it's expressed in this document. I have a really difficult time with that wording being in there. I'm with Councillor Bressie on this. And I know he's going back and forth and perhaps supporting the motion, but I will not be supporting the motion. I don't like that language is in there at this point in time. I'd like to see that as a consideration, exploring the merits of perhaps, but I'm not sure. I'm not convinced that it comes down to, in fact, I think it would be very difficult to convince me that it would come down to the city actually creating and operating a corporation. I don't think that that is at all an ideal way to go. It brings with it a great deal of overhead that will continue to cost us down the road, even as we try to navigate what comes up in the future. And to have a mandated corporation that is our responsibility ties us to more soundly to a direction that I would like to see more flexibility in the direction that we go, and the corporation is not it. I won't support this motion. I'd like to see a follow-up motion such as Councillor Palat suggested he may make.
Thanks, Councillor Friesen. Councillor Palat.
I guess for me, and I can appreciate Mayor Gibbons' comments about this will come back to council, and it will. I don't want to see administration waste time on something I'm not going to support later on. I made the mistake at several committee meetings to not voice my opinion, to get this Housing Corp agenda to want the colleagues have the conversation about this. In fact, I've never wanted a Housing Corp. I don't think it's the right path. So I don't know why, as a group, we would put that work on administration. Because at the end of the day, if we approve this, administration is going to have work created to go figure out Housing Corp and options on it. I also don't think there's much appetite at all from industry, as much as Mayor Given thinks he heard something. I guess we all can take communication course. I did not hear industry that was excited about it. They said they may be, but I think the collaboration part needs to be happening before we talk about the maybe. I think us jumping into this is one of the exact reasons we're here today, was there was an awful lot of frustration from community and industry specifically about a Housing Corp. And every time we leave this word in this document, we're going to have problems. And if we want to establish a relationship with our business community and with the stakeholders, these wording and this Housing Corporation staying in here is what's going to kill this strategy. And I don't want this strategy to die, but these need to be split apart. There's a strategy and there's a Housing Corp. And that Housing Corp needs to be split apart from this for this to have a chance, in my opinion.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Platt. Councillor Clayton.
Thanks, Mayor Given. Echoing Councillor Platt's comments, I encourage Council to consider other times that administration has reminded us by the time this gets to council, it's pretty much done. And so if you have concerns about it now, you need to defeat this motion. It can't go to council. We can't have administration working on anything until we're in a comfortable place to support this fully. So if you're not comfortable with it now, don't support it today, because it'll get to council. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Clayton. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I too have some concerns, and I'm not going to support this motion as it is. I'd like some I understand what Councillor Pliot and Councillor Friesen and just lately Councillor Clayton. I too have those concerns, and I don't like the word Housing Corp in that, and so I will not be supporting this. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor O'Toole. I don't see anybody else in the queue, so we'll go to Councillor Thiessen to close on his proposed amendments.
Thank you, Mayor Given. Thank you, everyone, for your thoughts. I can do the math. I see we're at a split, potentially 3-5. But the truth is I don't know what you were hearing, Councillor Platt. I asked industry very, very clearly, would you be willing to sit around a table to discuss options on how this would work? And very clearly they said yes. Very clearly they said yes to like 3 different rounds of questions that I wasn't setting them up for the Municipal Housing Corporation question, but I was setting them up to help become part of the solution to this. And now if the Municipal Housing Corporation takes seed, that's fine. We already defeated it at a previous council meeting. As far as funding it going forward, I don't think it's worked into our budget at this time, and we'll be having those discussions during our budget talk. Again, it's a tool in the toolbox. Simply by digging our feet in the sand and maybe putting our head in the sand too, it's not doing us any favors as far as like when you need a hammer, you look for a hammer. When you need a screwdriver, you look for a screwdriver. The Municipal Housing Corp may be the tool that helps us get to the end of our goals that we wish to achieve, which is essentially putting people in housing. Now, the amendment isn't saying we're going to establish a Municipal Housing Corporation. The amendment is saying we'll discuss that and or alternatives. We're looking for tools, and we're looking for ideas from industry, and we're looking for ideas from the community, and that's all this amendment is saying. I don't know why we're digging in so hard on it. Administration isn't going to do any work, and administration isn't going to be able to do any work that's funded without council's express say-so. They'll come back after they have those discussions with industry, and they'll say, yeah, we realize that Municipal Housing Corp isn't going to work, but we came up with this alternative solution. That's all that we're asking is through this amendment is go have that discussion with industry, see if there's better alternatives, and then come back. And that's really just the semantics of just adding this or alternatives. And our administration has worked very hard in putting this together, and they're willing to let go of the things that aren't going to work. I think we need to enable them to move forward and figure out if things are going to work or not. And they'll do that through conversations with the community and conversations with industry. So with that, I'm asking you all to, or at least one of you, to please change your vote.
Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Then we will call for the vote on Councillor Thiessen's motion to amend those 2 points to include the opportunity for alternatives to come forward. Please vote. Thank you. That motion does not carry on a tied vote. Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I appreciate where you're trying to go with this, Councillor Thiessen. I really do. And again, we maybe all hear things differently. I guess what I heard was that industry wanted to have collaboration and conversation about it. They didn't necessarily say they wanted it. And that's where I keep coming back. This has been the big sticking point. And I can't tell you how many dozens of maybe 50 phone calls I fielded around this. And the concern always comes back to the Housing Corp. So my motion will be to approve the strategy, but deleting any wording around the creation or establishment of a housing corp. If those wordings weren't in this program document, I can support it. So that'll be my motion.
And again, that's to amend the plan, and then we would have a follow-up motion to recommend it forward to council. Okay. So a motion to amend the plan to remove the words housing corporation. Okay. Open for discussion debate. Councillor O'Toole.
I'm very supportive of this, and we've had a great day of conversation. Lots of things have been brought up, and at this point in time, I'm actually at a comfortable state to support that motion.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor O'Toole. I will say that I won't support the motion. I think that cutting off alternatives is the opposite of what council should be doing. I would suggest that if what we're looking for is that dialogue, then if this motion didn't pass, because if we're at a similar sort of position as we were on the last motion, which happens with even numbers on councils, then maybe a follow-up motion would be to direct administration to work with industry to bring forward those recommendations on what those alternatives could look like. So we could, if there was a need for an off-camera dialogue and administration do some work and bring forward those recommendations, and that could happen. I would encourage council to give that up if this motion doesn't pass, because we're stuck on this idea of housing corp or not. Then I would suggest that if this motion did fail, then a follow-up could be that direction to administration to bring forward alternatives for council to consider including in the plan. Councillor Bressie.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I'm in the unfortunate, awkward position of somewhat being in the middle, and I couldn't. And the last motion I didn't like because it didn't go far enough in modifying this part of the plan, and this one I'm having trouble supporting because it goes too far in modifying the plan. Again, I think that the Housing Corporation has some very specific potentials behind it, such as maybe it's got financial tools that the MGA doesn't allow available to municipalities, and maybe those financial tools are accessible by just being a paper pass-through corporation that doesn't even have any staff people. That's officers or just city staff. I don't know. Maybe a housing corporation gives us the ability of having a board of directors that involves industry, and even if they don't have any permanent staff that report to them, maybe that board structure is good. Maybe a housing development corporation allows us to manage the city stock that we do have, and even if we don't ultimately support building new city stock, the city does currently own land and stock that we need to figure out what to do with, and maybe having a structure where there's a board of directors that represents the community making decisions on that, even if there aren't full-time staff positions attached to the board, maybe there's elements of it that are good. So I can't support this just because throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And again, I really couldn't support the business plan for the last housing development corp that we had presented to us earlier, because that's not my vision for this at all. Again, I don't know if we should have a housing development corporation. I just think there might be tools that are there that are important, and just saying that we're gonna get rid of the purpose that this housing development corporation serves because we don't like the wording and we don't like a business plan that we saw a couple weeks ago that was off the table, I don't think is the right way to go. If it was something such as change the plan to develop some sort of structure to encourage housing development through the city, which could contemplate a city staff position, it could contemplate a volunteer board, it could contemplate a housing development corporation. If there's something, I'd be really supportive of changing the language around housing development corporation. But just to say that we're going to take a knife to this part of the plan without any alternatives doesn't ring true for me, because there's important things that the Housing Development Corporation sets out to do that I think we all agree are important goals. We just don't know what the tool is there. So let's not throw out the goals that this is hoping to achieve just because we don't like the specific action attached to it.
Thanks, Councillor Bressy. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given, and thank you, Councillor Bressy, for so eloquently putting it the way you put it. I also can't support this motion. I think that's of no surprise. And I think the biggest reason is we're having this meeting here today to talk about an affordable housing strategy that seems to be caught up in a municipal housing corporation. Industry came to the table. They talked. They didn't have any problems with their affordable housing strategy. They thought it was really, really good. The fact that it intimates that it's a municipal housing corporation, I get it. But I also believe that when we have a bit more dialogue and a bit more conversation with industry and other community stakeholders at the table, we have the opportunity to create those toolboxes. And I just, like Councillor Bress said, I can't take a knife to this just because I don't want to explore it. That's led humanity down a lot of dark paths in the past, and I don't want to be part of that. So I won't support it.
Thanks, Councillor Thiessen. Councillor Clayton.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I agree that this plan has many great pieces in it. However, in my opinion, I'll support this motion because I think that right now the stumbling block is that housing corp. So by removing it from this document, it allows us to implement and approve the other pieces. And it's not to say that there's not a housing corp ever. It's just currently it doesn't need to be the first step. And so that's why I'll support the motion. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Clayton. Councillor Platt.
Is this for close?
Well, yeah, I'll come to you close. I just would say in respect to that, Councillor Clayton's last point there, I don't believe that this plan is built in a sequential way. I think there's a whole bunch of actions that are supposed to happen in 2020, and it's obvious with the amount of discussion around this, the dialogue about the how would happen first. But I think it could, there are a number of actions that are supposed to start in 2020, like review limits on small lot development, which is 3.2.1.b. That could just as easily be the first thing that happens. So I think the idea that any of these sort of come before the other, I think many of them are intended to happen concurrently. And I think having the opportunity to explore the range of options is really what the community should expect from us. Councillor Friesen, before we go to Councillor Platt to close.
Thank you, Mayor Given. This is not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. The baby is the most important thing. And I do not believe that creating a housing corporation is the most important thing in this document. As Mayor Given said, this is meant to happen concurrently. And as we do these other wonderful, exceptional, well thought out, important things, it may become clear what we need to do regarding a housing corporation or some other mechanism. It's not clear to us right now. We're not going to stop this otherwise fantastic strategy because this one piece isn't working right now, when the other pieces, as they go forward, will, I believe, provide clarity to this council on how to proceed with that. And with that, I would encourage my colleagues to support this motion such that we can move forward to the clarity that I think will come out of the rest of these action items that are held within this strategy. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Friesen. Councillor Platt.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I'm just looking at the definition of collaboration, the action or working with somebody to produce or create something. I feel this was a great document that was created by the city of Grande Prairie and was kind of shown to industry. And they didn't have a lot of necessarily chances to alter and change this plan. And I'm going to keep going back to it. If we truly believe, and if we were listening to what everybody said, every single person that basically come up here to talk about collaboration. So if we think the Housing Corp is going to be part of this, it can be part of it later on. After collaboration, if through education and through industry consultation and through stakeholder consultation, we come back and say, you know what, the Housing Corp makes sense. Maybe we should do the Housing Corp. We can add it. The stumbling block is that it's there. It can always be added later on. And I wouldn't be surprised if after conversation, industry comes back and says, you know what, and stakeholders come back and say, hey, it might make sense for us to have a shelf company with no staff. We can go after grants. We can do all the things we want. We can have a shelf company. A lot of business owners have shelf companies. It doesn't mean it has to be operational. The holdup keeps continuing to be for me, and it sounds like half of council here, is the housing corp. It can be added later on, guys and gals. It's the holdup today though. So if it's really about collaborating and working with stakeholders, if that's something that through that collaboration process shows us that maybe the housing corp is an important part of this, we can add it. Right now it's our hurdle. And by leaving it in here, I got to remind you guys again, we're still leaving a document that has administration walking away thinking a housing corp is something that we support. And it's going to take their time and energy away from just working on the strategy, which is what I truly believe we all want to accomplish. So I'm really urging you to support this. We want this housing strategy to move ahead. The one hurdle is the corp. And the corp can be added in later on, but it seems to be a huge roadblock today for council and for industry and stakeholders. So please support it.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Platt, for that close. So we'll call for the vote on Councillor Platt's motion to remove the words Housing Corporation from the document. Please vote. Thank you. That motion does not carry. On a tied vote, Councillor Bressie.
Great, thank you. Let me try a motion that I think might be more that maybe will get support, and that is. So I'm going to the summary tables. They're in page 17 of the document I'm looking at, and the strategy. There's two strategies that the Housing Development Corporation, that the actions form a housing corporation comes out of, and I don't know if I'm hearing that those strategies are necessarily objectionable to council. So one is strategy 1.1.2, develop an autonomous entity that takes on projects that require greater autonomy. That doesn't have to be a housing corporation. An idea I've had in my mind of an autonomous entity that might be great is actually more along the line of the Mayor's Opioid Response Task Force, which is a group that doesn't get much city resources, but has undertaken some effective projects in our community. I think there's a real need for, at the very least, getting the city, getting nonprofits, and getting industry around the table and talking more in a collaborative way. And so, saying an autonomous entity, there's a big range. A housing development corporation with full staff, so just a task force. The autonomous entity can mean a lot of different things. The issue is then the action coming out of that is establish a nonprofit housing corporation. That's got challenges that I agree with, but I like the strategy, and I don't want to throw out the strategy of that. The other place that a housing development corporation appears is in 2.4.3.a, which says create a housing corporation that will lead housing projects. Again, that housing corporation, troublesome to council. I don't know if I'm hearing that develop affordable housing, the strategy that itself is objectionable. And there's talk about what does that mean to develop affordable housing. Does that mean we're building it ourselves? Does that mean we're supporting others? But I think the strategies are fine, and that's why I can support the last motion, is because as much as I've got problems with these actions, I don't want to throw out these strategies that are getting to them. So what I'm going to suggest, or the motion I'm going to make, is that we amend action 1.1.2a and 2.4.3a to read collaborate with the community to establish the best structure the best autonomous structure to assist with the development of affordable housing. The idea of saying we're going to collaborate with culture. We realize that we need something that's autonomous from the city, and there's a big spectrum of what that could be. We know there's a need there that we have, but we're not saying what this need is. We're saying we're going to collaborate with industry, with the community to figure out what the best way to do this is. And that could be Housing Development Corporation, could be a task force, could be something completely different that we haven't contemplated yet. But saying we feel there's a need more than just the city to do this.
Sure. And so just clarify your wording, Councillor Bressie. I know Arlene was typing away madly to make sure that she got it, but just sort of clarify your wording there on what you would see those actions. So maybe individually, just look at like 1.1.2a and just sort of give us your exact wording on that one, and then we'll move on to the second.
So yeah, so again, the strategy says develop an autonomous entity that takes on projects that require greater autonomy, and then I'm proposing leave that, but the action I'm proposing is collaborate with the community to establish the best form of
autonomous entity.
Of an autonomous entity.
Okay. So we've got that one, and then the second one, Councillor Bressie, 2.4.3a.
Yeah, and then collaborate with the community to establish the best system to support the development of affordable housing.
Okay. Okay. So we're more specific, and I think we're clear enough that we would be able to capture both of those. Any discussion or debate on Councillor Bressy's proposed amendments? Councillor Friesen.
Thank you, Mayor Given, and thanks, Councillor Bressy, for that. It seems to me that you're quite bipolar in what you do. You're either creating a disturbance or bringing about peace. I can get behind this, since whatever is created would have to come through council anyway, because it is a concern to me that we get too close to something that replicates something we already have in community, and I would be loath to see that happen, so I wouldn't support anything like that. But I think that this would be a reasonable enough solution to collaborate on what that looks like, that something that everyone can live with, at least, that would be helpful in meeting the needs of or the intent of this would be what comes to council. So I think that I'll support this motion.
Thanks, Councillor Friesen. Any other discussion or debate on the motion? Seeing none, then I'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries. Were there any other amendments, motions arising? Councillor Bressie.
Thank you, Mayor Given. I'm going to move that Council direct administration to amend the strategy to reflect the specialized needs of youth. And that's a very broad motion because I want to give a lot of discretion to. And kind of the idea of this is I think that the strategy does recognize that there's special needs for people that have accessibility challenges. There's specialized needs that seniors have. I also think that there are specialized needs that youth have. And as the strategy is implemented, I think it's important to keep that in mind. And the strategy doesn't just exist for us. It exists for the people that have to pick this up in the future, whether they're new staff or new counselors that come in a couple years. And I left this very broad, just saying recognize the special needs of youth in terms of, I'm not giving direction to create a whole bunch of actions around that. I'm not giving direction. This wouldn't give direction to change the targets. I'd honestly just be happy with one paragraph somewhere in it that just highlights as affordable housing is getting developed, there's youth in our community who have these different needs than other people. I'd like somewhere in that strategy just to key somebody who has no experience in this, but all of a sudden has to make decisions about it, to realize, oh, youth are a part of our community too, and they might require a little bit of different thinking. And again, I want to leave this very open so administration can find the appropriate way to do that. But I think it's important that youth are recognized in here if we're going to recognize seniors and people with accessibility challenges.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Bressie. Any discussion or debate on the motion? I will enter to say that I won't support the motion, not because obviously I don't support having housing for youth, but I think that the intent of this is around physical units and encouraging the development of physical units within the community. I would acknowledge that youth may have some specific requirements, but I think that they are different and less specialized than people needing accessible housing or seniors. I think there are physical differences in how you build something for a senior versus how you build something for someone who is 16 or somebody who is 28. Like, you know, an able-bodied person at 16 or 28 can probably use the same space, or a senior or somebody with specific mobility issues probably can't use that same physical space. So I think I'm not supporting the motion because I think that that's more of an operational idea rather than about the physical units themselves. So on that basis. Any other discussion or debate? Seeing none, then I will call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion does carry. Were there any other motions arising? Councillor Bressie.
Sorry, Mayor Given, if you'll just forgive me, I'm just taking a second to scroll to the right page so I can make sure I'm saying this right. The last concern I've got with this plan has to do with the targets of it. And I think when we're looking at 2030 and we have an update on how did this plan go over the last 10 years, What do I hope I can share with the community then, whether I'm on council or not? And I sure hope I don't say to the community, hey, we kept affordable housing was an issue we identified back in 2018, and good news, we made sure the problem didn't get any worse in our community. That's not what I want to be saying in 2030. And I think that this strategy, the targets are set on the historical averages of the amount of need we've been meeting. And what's exciting about that is that target's actually above what the National Housing Strategy says it wants to do. So it appears that Grande Prairie is actually doing better than already doing better than the rest of the nation aspires to, which is great news. At the same time, I really hope over the next 10 years, we don't just scale our response to population growth in the city and growth of people. I hope we actually make progress on this. And so I'm going to move that we direct administration to increase the level of service by for non-specialized units to 42%, for accessible units to 72%, and for seniors to 80%. So if you read the table, that's increase them all by 15%, saying that if we're right now, our historical level of service is we've met the need for 65% of seniors. Well, I'd love us in 10 years if we're actually meeting the need for 80% of seniors. Actually, I'd love us to do 100, but I think we should at least aspire to do 80. I hope council will support us being a bit more aspirational than our historical average. I remind council that this plan doesn't contemplate city dollars meeting all of these targets. It's thinking about how can we harness the dollars in the community. How can we harness federal and provincial giving? How can we harness new strategies, new ways of doing things to reduce the amount of families in core housing need and be meeting more of them? So I'm not necessarily suggesting that the city spend a whole lot more money or even any more money if we increase our targets. I think we should be more aspirational in saying we're going to maintain our historical level of service. Let's actually try to make progress on this over the next 10 years.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Bressie. Any discussion or debate on the motion? I will enter to say and let it be known that I'm not one-sided on this. I think that that's an overreach for the plan. I think the plan was intended to be as practical and actionable as possible. I think that is a really substantive change. The tweaking of the percentage actually has a pretty significant ripple impact on the number of units, and the strategies that you might employ to try to get at that number of units might be significantly different. So I appreciate the intent, I appreciate the aspiration, and had council at a, had we set that goal at a high level at an early stage, I think I could support it. I think at this later stage where, we all, I think we're aware that there was going to be an unmet need. I would like us to see something that's practical and actionable, and my concern would be ratcheting up the level of service that much doesn't meet my criteria for that, so I won't be able to support the motion. Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I think that the administration has done a lot of work to come up with those numbers over the years, to come up with a game plan, and I think that economy will have a big influence in where we're at in 10 years, and I will not be supporting this. I think if we need to adjust it, there will be times that'll be able to happen, but not at this time. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor O'Toole. Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I also can't support the motion. I think it's good to be aspirational, but I think this is beyond our reach. I also think if we're already punching our weight higher than the national average, we should be saying "great job, community." And sometimes I don't think we do that. I think if we're punching our weight up higher, we should be putting a little bit of pat on the back instead of it being quite negative right now, where it sounds like we're not doing enough. And so I think by asking for us to even do further, it's just a little bit too much of a reach for me at this point.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given, and thank you for the motion, Dylan Bressie. Unlike my council colleagues, I too have aspirational goals, over aspirational goals, I guess. Everyone's aspirational around this table. I will support this motion, and largely because not that I fully expect us to hit those targets. I would love to hit those targets. It would put Grande Prairie in a really enviable position across the country. But I like to set the bar really, really high. And so that we don't achieve it. A former high jumper, and I don't think I ever hit the highest height I ever wanted to hit. But I want to support this because I think housing is an imperative human right and privilege that not everybody has there, and we don't have necessarily the right amount of inventory or stock to deal with growth demands or otherwise. And in saying those two little things, I won't belabor you with a lot of words like I normally do. I will just say that I'm full support of the plan, and keep our aspirations high, and you never know what we can achieve.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Thiessen. I don't see anybody else in the queue. Councillor Bressy to close.
Great. I do just want to address one thing, which is this is why am I bringing this up? And I just point out that I'm pretty sure I've said this every time that we've discussed the strategy. Today just happens to be the first time that I'm in a position where I get to vote and make motions on the strategy. So that's why I'm bringing it up today. I don't think today's the first time I said that. But also just to again point out that this strategy isn't saying everything the city's going to do. The strategy is saying what do we hope the community accomplishes. And I know when I go out and I tell people, hey, council, we've heard that affordable housing is a big issue in our community. We know this is a big concern for people here. Good news, we've got a 10-year plan. And when they go, what do you hope to accomplish with that 10-year plan? I sure hope I don't have to tell them, well, we're not going to let the problem get any worse over the next 10 years that it's been in our community. I sure hope that I can go out and say, we've got a plan to substantially improve this problem in our community over the next 10 years. I honestly think we're letting the people that we represent down if we're just saying we're going to allow this to be what it's historically been in our community.
Thanks, Councillor Bressy, for that close. We'll call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion does not carry on a tied vote. Councillor Palat.
Thanks, Mayor Given. There was a lot of conversation about a grant coordinator and a coordinator on that, and I do think there's an opportunity here for the city to look at a position like that. Again, I would hope that process would normally come through CLT and our CAO in a budget process, but I do think that this is a conversation that I want to see us continue to have. So I'm going to make a motion that we direct administration to bring back a report to the appropriate standing committee for what a grant coordinator position would look like for the entire city's operations. And specifically on how it would support a housing strategy. My intent with that is that we have an opportunity to have a conversation to see if we have a will of council to say we do need to fund this position, what the position would look like. I think that position definitely has a lot of potential. I know for me personally, I don't think it's enough just to be looking at just the housing corp, but I think that's the intent of the original part of it, is the housing strategy and how we can support it. It could layer into other opportunities, but I'd like to have a conversation specifically about that. My problem with strategies in general and all these is, it's a beautiful document. I think if we don't dissect it into pieces, it doesn't happen really quick. And if I'm worried that we need to dissect this into a few pieces to have this strategy move forward in a more timely fashion. I also think that part of that will allow us to have a committee conversation, and that will force more collaboration from stakeholders in industry to see how they could potentially maybe come forward, and maybe as Councillor Friesen had an idea that's maybe it's not even the city's doing it, but I think we need to have that conversation sooner than later. So I hope we can support that motion.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor Platt. So your direction to administration is independent of the plan? Are you proposing to amend the plan, or or was your motion separate from the plan? Okay. Your microphone is not on, Councillor Platt.
Sorry. It's not a specific part of the strategy. It's big from the conversation that was happened today and with everybody, that the stakeholders that talked about it. I just want to make sure we capture it today while we're in the room, that this is something I think we should be having a further conversation about.
Okay. Thanks very much. Councillor Bressy.
Great. Thank you, Mayor Given. And I can't support this motion for two reasons. I think that there's different kinds of grants, and I think when it comes to housing grants, the strategy calls for developing internal city resource to work on housing initiatives. I assume that would be going after these grants, and so I think that's covered. And in terms of, I used to think, and I know I've had some conversations with my colleagues, that the city should look at a grant writer to help external organizations. But that's also something that I know both the Volunteer Service Bureau and the Sport Connector have started doing the last year and a half, and I've actually worked with organizations that I've actually worked with nonprofits that have accessed both of those organizations and have had successful grant opportunities come their way because of that. And I've specifically heard from both the VSB and the Sport Connector, hey, we know the city's talked about this in the past. Please don't talk about this in the future, because we're starting to do that, and we want you guys to get out of our sandbox, because we could do it better and cheaper than you, and that's why we exist. And so I can't support this. I really think that if there's I can't support this motion right now.
Thanks, Councillor Bressie. I'll say that I won't be supporting the motion either. I know the City of Grande Prairie has previously, in previous cycles, funded a grant coordinator position to support community organizations at an external organization. My understanding or belief, at least, is that many city departments do look for grants that are relevant to their area. And I think the idea that one centralized position would be able to capture all the knowledge on housing, on tree planting, on sport, volunteer programs, and all of the different community organizations that are involved in that. I think a distributed model is much better, and so I wouldn't see that being a centralized resource. A centralized resource specific to a particular issue, that makes sense to me, and I think that that's a portion of what the permanent affordable housing coordinator position would do, but would be a specific subject matter expert to housing and affordable housing. And so I won't support the motion. Councillor Clayton.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I will support the motion. I think that this isn't deciding that we're actually hiring somebody. It's looking at the opportunities for a coordinator. And the reason I think a grant coordinator is something to explore is that between these organizations, as Councillor Bressie mentions, and various organizations around our community, there are grants being applied for all the time. If the city had a coordinator that could work with these organizations to coordinate the application so that the best grants were being applied for the most appropriate things, I think that would be an ideal situation. So I'm willing to explore this opportunity. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Clayton. I don't see anybody else in the queue, so I go to Councillor Palat to close.
Thanks, Mayor Given. I guess for me to close on this, it's just more the conversation I want to have happen. I agree with Councillor Bressie. Maybe the conversation turns into we go, you know what? It's an RFP to VSB because they can do it better. But at some point, I think we need to have that conversation. I think a program coordinator for the city makes a lot of sense. I don't expect them to be a skill set person on specific whether they should plant a tree or whether it's homelessness, but I would love them to have the skill sets of that they're looking for grants. And I think lots of times we try to hire people that do other things, and then they try to do a grant off the side of their desk, and I think that's a very unsuccessful approach. I think if somebody's goal every day is to learn how to properly write grants with support from people who they're writing them for, I think that can go a long way for our organization. And if it's something that we come through with the conversation and the report comes back that shows it's not necessary, I think then we've achieved one of the strategies in here we wanted to talk about was a coordinating position. So again, I want to see the strategy move forward. If that's really important for CSD and for this strategy to happen is to have a person that's going to look into that I would hope we'd support that. And so that's why I threw it out here today, and that's why I'm hoping you support it.
Thanks, Councillor Platt. That was our close. So we'll vote on Councillor Platt's motion. Please vote. Thank you. That motion does carry. Direction to administration. Is there any other business arising? At some point, Council, we need to actually deal with the plan itself and whether it is going forward to Council or not. Councillor Thiessen.
Thank you very much, Mayor Given. I would move that committee recommend Council approve the affordable housing strategy as amended.
Okay. Thanks very much, Councillor Thiessen. Any discussion or debate on that recommendation? Councillor Bressie.
Great, thank you, Mayor Given. Just a process question. I'd question for administration. I assume that if this motion passed, that we'd have the plan as you guys amended circulated in a council agenda package, or I just want to make sure if council's going to vote on it that I know what we're actually voting on when we get to council. So what's the process like this look like? Would we see it in 2 weeks? Would we see it in longer? I just get a bit of hint from administration what this might look like if we pass this motion?
I think I'll direct that probably to Director Manuel, just in terms of what the process would be to amend the plan based on the motions made here today and bring it forward to Council. Director Manuel?
So certainly we have the content, so it's just a matter of incorporating it into the design. The only hiccup is we're also going into budget next week following that, I suspect sometime later this month we'll be in good shape to have this in front of you.
And it would come forward in the package in its amended form.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion? Seeing none, then I will call for the vote. Please vote. Thank you. That motion carries, and I think that concludes all our business for this Council Committee of the Whole. Thanks very much, everybody.